Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Flora, thank you so much for joining us today. You have such an interesting background and across what you're doing at Target as well as outside of it, that I'm kind of excited to hit on a lot of topics today, if you're willing to indulge me. But I think it kind of, as much as we're all likely struggling a little bit with pandemic fatigue, I think we'd be a little remiss if we didn't at least start there, and kind of thinking through, if we were having this conversation last April, we'd probably be talking about the pressure and the stress that retailers like Target are feeling, and things like toilet paper shortages and things like that. But now that we've come kind of a full year forward, talk to me a little bit about what you've learned, kind of navigating those waters at retail over the last year.
Yeah, and pleasure to finally meet you as well, Jacquelyn.
Yeah.
So just to give context, like Target, we are in Minneapolis, and so I like to just put that out there to remind people, like with everything that has happened here in the past year, especially working remotely in Minneapolis in the midst of everything while we're navigating a pandemic, in the midst of racial reckoning, all at the same time, in the midst of deeper economic disparities. Like it was a lot. It was a lot going on from mentally as well as thinking about the work professionally side. Like speaking first to the lens of the workspace, like I think for us as Target, we all took a pause, I think, to really first and foremost check on everyone's well-being. I think the brand was really because we weren't just navigating with the idea of what does COVID impact, but also like how are we in the midst of navigating a racial reckoning in the midst of all that. I think some of the learnings that I garnered was this notion of like, how can we be agile in a way that we've never been agile before? I definitely think that, working in a space of retail and corporations, like the idea of like, hey, there is sometimes more of a process to get something through the doors, to get in marketing, so on and so forth. And a lot of us were building strategies and working on campaigns that had to be paused. And I think, I've been at the brand now for close to 4 years, and we really worked on like, let's pause, let's read the data. Let's look at like, first of all, like how are our store team members feeling? How are we making sure? How are we navigating with the idea of closing our stores or shutting down to limit the experience, which is something we're known for, is our store experience, but how do we make it safe? And how do we ensure that we're also providing the necessities that people need? So there were things that we were thinking about in terms of like, what are the key essentials that guests, are really needing, versus like if there's key products that maybe we should think about not necessarily trying to push as hard, versus what are like the essentials like toilet paper, like beauty products, like food and beverage that people were really thinking about. So I think agility was something in the midst of that. And I think flexibility. Seeing a lot of amazing like teams at Target, a lot of people of us coming together and forming task force, like I think between our leadership, being able to really partner with our enterprise risk team, PR, marketing, supply chain, store communications, and really being able to move in a very fast way to coordinate in the midst of, and then really ampling up digital services in the midst of that was something that was great to see. And I think lastly, one of the key learnings I also garnered was just ultimately like, how are we just ensuring that there's safety? There was a lot of our messaging that really transitioned from, hey, here's our Target run, come in quick to shop our products. Here's like, hey, we're cutting back our hours. We're making sure people are able to get in at a safe rate, and also ensuring that like our team members also had the proper, systems in place to ensure their own safety in the midst of our guests as well having their safety.
Yeah, it was certainly a testament to agility and having to pivot the way you typically go to market when you think about these things. But because your store experience is such a critical aspect to the growth of Target as a business, what steps did you take over the last year to really drive the message of safety, to not only ensure that your Target employees felt safe in that environment and able to move the business forward, but instill consumer confidence that they could still shop in some different capacities and get the things that they needed whilst feeling like they were being cared for.
Yeah, I think like one of the key things that like our marketing team did is that, in the midst of shifting strategies and shifting plans, like, they really worked on how do we communicate in a broad way our COVID response? Like, what is it that Target is actually doing to provide safety? How are we demonstrating that? And then as well, how are we making sure that our store team members are being able to have the resources that they need? So being able to demonstrate and show, okay, what is the process physically of us cleaning? How are we actually putting in new, in-store marketing signage to demonstrate distance? And also how are we implementing things of hand sanitizers or elements of if you are coming for a drive up or pickup, like what is that process looking like? So that if you don't want to necessarily interact and go into the store, we can quickly come to you in that process. So I think through the elements of marketing, that was one layer of it all. And then I think as well, like even in our digital space, like our digital marketing teams were ensuring like, hey, we also want to ensure if you still want to get your essentials and products, how do we drive attention to our site? That allowed people to really like, so that we're not trying to like, hey, come in our store in a very fast pace, come if you need to, but this is going to be the process, but really being able to really increase our digital presence and attention for that, and then really being able to enable more of the fulfillment services. And then I think as well, like one of the things that was great that I saw that the brand did and with our leadership doing is like providing just additional bonuses and extra resources, especially for our store team members. Our people of us at headquarters, we also were able to get well-being resources too, but knowing that our store team members, as we were all figuring out like how advanced is COVID, like what are all the symptoms of it? How do you fully get it? While we were one of the few retailers that was able to stay open. And so like there was a lot that was going on behind the scenes to really ensure that like, hey, if store team members, what are resources that are needed to make sure they're safe? Like how is their communication happening actively between our stores and back at headquarters? And then really being able to make sure that we're just tracking. And so we probably saw so many layers of data that I probably have ever seen in a matter of 1 year to think about like, okay, it can change literally from week to week. Does this change our messaging? Do we put more resources here? Do we prioritize this? And for me, specifically, like I focus on our multicultural marketing work, especially around our Black consumer. And so always was top of mind for me as well, as like, how are we also thinking about communities that are being most underserved? And how do we think about our approach with that in our data?
I can absolutely relate. As an agency executive, I'm inundated with data all the time, and constantly you just get so much more these days, and you're having to pivot quickly against that data. So it's exciting, but it can be a little overwhelming. I know obviously right now we're still deep within sort of the pandemic. It's certainly not over by any stretch, but I think we're all we've pivoted. We've become a little bit more accustomed to this life. So kind of beyond the pandemic lens, keeping with the theme of the summit today is really around consumer engagement. And Target is arguably kind of famous for their consumer engagement, all the way down to how it's deep in the DNA of thinking of your shoppers as guests, instead of just shoppers. So are there ways that Target engages with consumers, pandemic or not, that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the store experience. I know I'm sure I was reading memes even over the course of COVID last year, in the midst of COVID still today, but just seeing memes from some of our Target guests on social media is like, man, like if I can just go like to a Target right now, that's the way that they can like decompress or just walk around the store, either with their Starbucks or being able to peruse the aisle. I know that for me was something that I used to do to be able to just like decompress. And so definitely seeing our guests, sharing feedback in that standpoint was, definitely understandable. I think, the lens of, I always keep repeating our store team members, but I think that's something that is truly remarkable in what the brand, brings to the table, because our store team members, they don't, you're not interacting with me as a guest at headquarters like you don't know me, but you're interacting at your local Target, engaging with a store team member that is either helping you navigate, what products you're looking for, or being able to provide additional assistance if you're trying to get in and out of the lanes, or trying to figure out like, hey, can I order this here? Or do you have any product recommendations for me? And so I think that is something that the brand, in terms of having this, friendly and welcoming team member setting, that the brand has really elevated further, hence why it was even more important when COVID hit, how much more resources were being put to ensure that the team members were safe. And I think as well, like, I think one thing about our brand and the consumer engagement is just this idea of fun and joy. Like we always say that our purpose to, is to help all families discover the joy of everyday life. And I think like what people have kind of taken Target in a way, and like, it's kind of like a friend. It's kind of like that brand, like that best friend in a way, where on social, where it's like, hey, I got to pick this up from Target. Plus I bought 10 more things that I didn't know I was going to get. Or, I went on a date at Target. Or like I've had a couple people post, like I've had a friend who's gone on a date at Target and it was the best experience for them. And I think there's been this way of humanizing kind of like the brand, not just for the sake of like, hey, here's a bullseye and here's a retailer, but the idea of this experience where, you're coming in, or you're going online and perusing and discovering things, or you're getting something delivered, or you're just engaging in the values that we share, whether it be through diversity inclusion, whether it be through sustainability, whether it be in how we really lean in, especially in our LGBTQ focuses and other areas. So I think that lens of just like being a brand that is first and foremost human, even though like we are a retailer, but I think a lot of our guests who really stuck with us and really supported us, I think like see us kind of as that idea of like this friend in a way, which is really awesome to see.
I am 100% guilty of that. Now, everyone being home, with my child is home, like my Sunday trip to Target is like my thing, and it's my solace and my moment away, right? Whereas it used to be more of a chore, and now I'm like, I gotta go to Target, which I kind of feel like I'm like telling my husband, I gotta go see my friend because I gotta get out of here.
Right. So when you come back home and you have multiple bags, and it's like, oh wait, what?
Every time. No, that's wonderful. Let's shift gears a little bit. You had kind of touched on briefly that you lead the multicultural marketing efforts at Target. And so I know that you are heavily involved in the DE&I initiatives at Target. Tell us a little bit about the steps you and Target are taking to engage specifically with the Black community.
Yeah, so I'm part of a team. So specifically, like our team is inclusive marketing. We have our director on the team, and then I specifically lead our Black audience marketing strategy on it. And so, which of course, in the past year, there's of course been a more prioritized focus on Black communities. But specifically, like one of the areas that I know that maybe people have heard about, or there's probably a bit more discussion about, is our Racial Equity and Action Committee, so REACH. So of course, as I mentioned, like, after everything that happened this past year with George Floyd's murder, and us as well being in Minneapolis, and us as a brand really caring about diversity and inclusion, before it even became more of a statement that brands industries were using even more. So the notion was the fact of like, how are we thinking about the safety of our Black team members? How are we thinking about that of our guests, communities, the economic support of Black businesses? That's been something that's been very important, as well as how are we thinking about just overarchingly, like, how are we just showing up every day in support of our values? So like recently we came out this past year, actually the past week or so, with a couple of our key new pledges and initiatives that internally we've been working on for quite some time, to really look at the root of, like, if we're talking about actually addressing and getting to the root of systemic racism, and what role do brands play in that, and retail corporations, and how do we actually remove those barriers? What does it mean to actually go in depth in that lens? So recently we came out with a commitment regarding our $2 billion commitment in regards to supporting Black-owned businesses and Black brands. So one of those elements as part of that was, by 2025, the goal to get to 500 Black-owned brands that we'll be bringing in. Another part of that was, in procurement, in terms of increasing and marketing Black agency, increasing and bringing in Black agencies, construction companies, indirect suppliers, things of that nature, as well as like the launch of our new accelerator program called Forward Founders, which was actually developed by our internal accelerator team that really actually brought together an entrepreneurship kind of advisory council made up of various Black founders, that some of them who we already work with at Target and are on our shelf, some of them who've been external partners, to really get to like, what is it that if we're thinking about designing accelerators and supporting Black businesses, what are some of the root issues within that, in terms of, even as you think about, terms and payment, if you're a small business, what does that mean? Even if you think about the lens of understanding inventory and having a distributor and making sure you have products, not just on the shelf, but being able to survive and grow and scale. And even thinking about the fact that like many Black entrepreneurs, like many of them are solopreneurs, especially women. So even how the program was designed was like, hey, you're probably, even chances are likely working full-time while you're working on your business. And so having the accelerator even actually in the evenings and afternoons versus having it during the day was different, various things that the team was considering. And so I say that piece specifically to say that like, there's been a lot of like in-depth discussions that have been going on even before that commitment was even shared, in regards to like, if we're going to come out with these commitments and pledges, it's like, our intention fully is like, we want to be able to see businesses thrive and not just like we are trying to increase a number and get on a shelf and then the brands unfortunately fade away within a year or so, because we know the impact that can have, especially in a small business. So that's an area that's been so important to me as well, like, because I'm also an entrepreneur, I also work in 9 to 5, but also but understanding the fact that there are just ongoing disparities, and Target has always kind of really supported, minority-owned businesses and making avenues and inroads in that, but taking the step further for us to really partner and co-collaborate and co-create with Black entrepreneurs, businesses, and being like, what are we missing the mark on? And how do we need to work on transforming that? And hopefully in the process, it's able to inspire others, because we know we're not perfect and we know we absolutely still have a ways to go. But glad to see that commitment.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see the traction and commitment. I think it's certainly very top of mind for everyone, but it's one thing for everyone to be mindful. It's a whole other to be actionable, and being actionable requires a lot of logistics and a lot of, thinking through all of the ramifications of your decision. So especially being a Minneapolis-based business, I love to see organizations like yours sort of being a catalyst for change and truly creating the environment for that change to be real and not just theory or something that everyone kind of is talking about. So that's certainly amazing. Along those lines, I know that you had led or leading an initiative at Target called Black Beyond Measures. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So as part of my role, I help, really look at how are we just engaging and building equity with our Black consumers and who are our Black consumers at Target, but also the lens of Black Beyond Measure was something that we launched actually a year ago. It's gotten more, attention now, but we were able to kind of really, conduct some amazing research to understand a segment of the Black population and Black consumers, and really understanding what this idea of progress and this idea of achieving your goals and dreams, the way that you want to see it and have it be. And, when we were just in the midst of starting and launching our Black History Month campaign last January, as we've had the campaign now for 6 years, but the assortment. But one of the things I was talking to my creative team about was how can we take some of the key insights that we learned from that research, and this notion that, as Black people being, there's no limit to what we can achieve, and this idea of optimism and hope, even despite adversity, but also knowing that there's still more to be done. And our creative team really came up with this amazing phrase called Black Beyond Measure. to really represent this idea of Black success, but on your own terms and being unapologetically Black in who you are. And we launched that as part during our Black History Month assortment of January last year. And it just really started to pick up steam. And then secondly, my thinking was like, hey, how do we actually think about turning this into an always on kind of approach and a platform where we are consistently, what does it mean to deepen engagement with our Black guests, like in a consistent way? Of course, we have what we sell and everything, but what does that part mean? And so we actually had developed a strategy. And then, of course, when COVID hit, and then unfortunately when George Floyd died, like we worked on like, okay, is the strategy that we're creating, is this the right approach? Is where we were heading with it, like, is this where it should be? Or do we need to take a step back, think about what's really going on in the cultural landscape, what's really going on to the impact of Black communities, and what is it that the root that we need to solve, and what can we solve as a brand? And it meant that we needed to go deeper in this idea. If we're a brand that stands for joy, what does it also means and how we're supporting in an element of advancing racial justice? And we took time to revamp the strategic approach and the strategy. I don't know how many times worked on changing strategies in the past year, but eventually we relaunched the campaign and the platform, should I say. I like to call it a platform versus a campaign last fall. And that was really centered on, what does it mean to uplift Black joy, amplify Black voices, our brands? What are we doing with our commitments? Because it was like, we're not going to put out necessarily just a campaign for the sake of like, hey, here's Black people, you're happy, but like, what is Target as a brand also doing simultaneously towards advancing racial justice? And then, from there, we've been building it up. Either we, had a whole content approach focused on our HBCU Design Challenge that was launched internally as an opportunity for historically Black college and university students who are rising art students who are interested in the space of getting into design, apparel. So we had a whole kind of content approach really focusing on the winners of the challenge who eventually had their assortment included in our Black History Month assortment that just happened this year, and really documenting their journey. They were getting mentorship, they were being able to access and have opportunities to learn further about the space of retail. And then we also just did amazing content that also, leaned into content partners we were leveraging that supported Black female-owned businesses, thinking about mental health in that area of Black, especially Black millennials and Black women. And then we've also this year, as we've now come off of Black History Month, we really went deeper into economic well-being. And what does it mean to have that as a core foundation to your overall well-being within the Black community? How does that tie into your well-being, your financial state, the resources and things of that nature, and just seeing Black businesses who are either thriving from Target, but also knowing like what is Target as a brand doing ongoingly to support and easily shop Black-owned businesses. So lastly, as part of that, we also launched our Black Beyond Measure page and site platform, where since September of last year, we now have a Buy Black page, because we also saw from a lot of our searches that, whether you were Black, whether you were non-Black, people were searching more as a way to shop and easily find Black-owned businesses. And so that has been something that's been a very key element as well of our experience, where you can either shop the brands that we have at Target, you can learn more about what does Black Beyond Measure mean in its fullest sense, and kind of this idea of Black joy, and then be able to take action in terms of either whether you're a business yourself who's looking to get support from the supplier diversity team, you're looking to participate in our accelerators, or you're just looking for the fact of like, what is Target ongoingly doing towards advancing racial justice?
Like some of the other things that you had talked about, I love the commitment, but I love from sort of a marketing lens, like truly creating an end-to-end experience that centers around a critical business purpose and for growth, but also for the betterment of society. I certainly applaud your efforts there and the diligence and what you've done. I think what's also interesting and that I've been dying to actually talk to you, because what I actually really want to kind of hit on is clearly you're leading so much of this transformative endeavors with Target, but I actually want to turn the attention a little bit to you personally, and the passion you have for the space extends outside of your job at Target in a couple of ways. So, kind of the first one is, you're the author of a children's book. Don't Give Up, Aaliyah. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit about your book and, what was the inspiration for that? What were you hoping to achieve? And do you feel like you did that?
Yeah, definitely share. And just letting people know, like, I created the book before I came to Target, so no issues.
Side hustles are allowed. It's okay.
Just in case anyone from Target's watching, I created that before I came to Target. But basically, yeah, for me, diversity and inclusion, and especially the empowerment of girls of color, has always, I very much see that as my vocation, in terms of no matter what I'm doing, there's either always some tie to an empowerment, especially girls of color, because I've been inspired by so many Black women in my life. But I am the founder of a company called Courage Dolls, and it's a multicultural doll and book company that focuses on elevating, educating, encouraging girls of color to be unstoppable. And so, to your point, Jacquelyn, the book, I created a children's book. It was actually when I was in grad school, actually right before I came to Target. I was let me rewind a little bit more, because it goes a little bit beyond just my grad experience. But when I was in high school, I was watching this documentary called A Girl Like Me, and it was this doll test that was done. So for those who may be watching, you may have heard of the doll test. It's just been this experiment that's been done over the decades to study the impact of racism and segregation on young Black children through the years. And so a group of Black children were given a Black doll and a white doll, and they were asked various questions such as which doll is prettier, smarter, more likely to succeed, etc. The children overwhelmingly chose the white doll when it came to anything positive, and they chose the Black doll when it came to anything negative. This test was done initially in the 1940s as part of the Brown versus Board of Education, as a way, it played a critical piece in when schools decided to become integrated. Not decided, but when it was actually through the Supreme Court actually implementing, it showed the impact of what segregation was just doing, and seeing negative portrayals or lack of positive portrayals, especially of Black children or children of color, the impact it had in the long run. And so when I saw that test, which was done years later, and seeing similar results, it just stuck with me. Like, I was in high school, it was health class. So I'm just trying to, get my snacks and make sure, go through my day. I got to study for SATs and stuff. But in that moment, it just stuck with me so much. And I didn't know what I wanted to do with that feeling, but I knew that representation and the idea that toys and stories, it's one of the first things that kids are engaging with when they're building their imagination, when they're thinking of what they could possibly be. And so it was years later that when I went to grad school, and it was just always stuck with me. I was mentoring young girls through the years. I was just learning and being inspired by young kids of today who were just honestly I'll say kick-ass. I'm probably not allowed to say that, but just doing kick-ass things. And ultimately, I decided to start working on creating officially the doll, the first doll, Aaliyah. And then I wrote a children's book, because I said I wanted to have, I didn't want it to be a fashion doll, but I also didn't necessarily want to have a story that was maybe I want to be more modern of today, and just girls who are just doing phenomenal things. And so the book teaches kids the early principles of entrepreneurship. It's about this 8-year-old girl named Aaliyah. She's a spunky, kind of old soul 8-year-old from Chicago. And she's just always inspired by things happening in her community. And she eventually sees an issue, and then she decides okay, I'm going to create this solution or invent this thing. But she goes through the process of trying to create a new product that solves for her community. But she learns along the way that entrepreneurship is something that is very hard to do alone. And it typically always really takes the people who are your core foundation, which is your family and friends, when you're starting off, especially as a person of color, or especially as a female owner. And so it just serves as just to teach those kind of principles and values of perseverance, the idea of, understanding your why, and being able to really, tie into the fact of having your family and friends to help continue to push you through while you're still navigating the many obstacles and figuring things out.
And what kind of feedback are you getting from the book?
Yeah, no, the book has been, awesome. It's definitely had great responses. When I don't sell at Target, so nothing is I'm going to make sure I'm always letting people know for legality. I keep it from Target knows I have my company, but I keep it all separate. But I sell it on my site, but I also, before COVID, was doing a lot of events and doing a lot of readings. And every person, like I get messages even out, still on social media. Like one person messaged me recently and was just like, man, your story like really inspired my daughter. Or like, man, you're the person that wrote that book. Wait, it's you? Like, and it's been great. I've had a, partnership with like our local library here and been able to give a lot of books there and donated as well to a lot of different organizations, and, been able to talk with educators and teachers who've also asked me like, how can we like maybe use some of the principles here to create lesson plans and guides that also can help for children who are interested in the space of either entrepreneurship or just learning some of the fundamental principles of what the book represents. And so, I think like the idea of like, yes, the sales have been great, but also the most importantly, the values of what it represents. And kind of when I'm able to see kind of especially young girl of color who gets very excited reading it or holding a doll that we have. And it's like, this looks like me. Like it finally looks like me. Those are just like always the moments to kind of keep going in this process.
Well, between, clearly a thriving and critical role at Target, your MBA, obviously, and then Garage Dolls as a separate side hustle. I assume there's a little Aaliyah in you for.
Yes, yes,
She
yes.
might be fictional, but I'm not sure how fictional Aaliyah is. But I love it. The last question I think I kind of have for you is, so obviously we've covered a lot of ground between what you're doing at Target and as well as what you're kind of doing in your personal life. But so you seem like you have a lot going on, and so kind of in the most amazing ways. So I almost feel bad asking, but it's like, dare I ask, what's next for you?
Yeah, like at the end of the day, I'll probably go watch an episode of The Office. Like I was like, that's honestly how
I'll
I
probably go to Target.
It's like if anybody wants to give me anything, it's anything The Office. That's how I survived COVID. But the idea of right now with Target, like I'm in the throes, of course, as we're thinking about data and strategy. And like another previous conversation I was watching, and they were thinking about how consumer engagement and consumer purchase has transformed in such a way. And I'm always just like, I'm still a student, always consuming and learning from other brands, as well as learning about how our, this younger generation of consumer to expect more from brands and values, expect more from brands and how they're actually are not performatively addressing racial justice, but actually actively and, demonstrating and showing the transparency of their journey towards advancing racial justice. And then lastly, the idea of, thinking about the space of digital and increase of social and what that means for us as a brand, and what that means, especially for the audience that I target, which is very much, influencers and drives culture. And I've been, I listen to a lot of Clubhouses right now. Clubhouse has been like, I'm not sure if Clubhouse has been mentioned at all through any of these summits, but I'm very, much looking at the idea of what these social audio platforms are really representing. But I think one thing that's very important that I'm keeping in mind, especially as I think about Black consumers and Black millennial and Gen Z guests, as I continue working through strategies, is how do we ensure like that they're getting credit and they're able to monetize their work? Because I think one thing probably in the midst of a lot of people using TikTok and other platforms this past year is that also the back end of that is that a lot of people who are originating dances or originating content, who especially were Black, weren't getting credit or weren't actually being able to get their work monetized. And so I think that's something we're very much keeping in mind, is like, as we think about partners we're working with, things of that nature, like how are we in an ongoing way providing resources and support? So like if they don't have necessarily like, hey, a team around them to be able to navigate with a mass retailer, how are we thinking about our processes and policies so to ensure that like they are having an equitable and fair experience as engaging with us as we want to engage with them. So right now, strategies, thinking about 2022 and just kind of continuously learning. And then while with my business, it's just like working as well. Like what's so great about being able to work at Target while also on the side working on my business is that it all ladders back up to representation and diversity and inclusion, like driving where the future growth is, but also deepening engagement. And so it's great that I kind of have the opportunity to kind of have these transferable skills between my job and my business.
Oh, that's wonderful. I don't know if there's any questions from the audience.
Oh, I think there are.
I see some, but I feel like those were from the previous one.
Oh, yeah, maybe, yeah. That probably was from the previous one.
Here we go. Okay, I think there are a couple. So let's see here. What has been your most successful marketing program?
I think, honestly, like, because probably what we just now did with Black History Month, like, I try to always make sure I'm emphasizing that, like, don't only target Black consumers during Black History Month. Like, like that is the thing. Like, it's not like, because we have our campaigns running throughout the year. It just so happens that we get more media attention during Black History Month. But for all of us as brands and all of us as marketers on this call, like, think of your customers, these guests, engaging them all year round. But when we did launch our Black History Month campaign, it was truly remarkable in the sense that, we wanted to demonstrate, like I said, like well-being and economic well-being, a core foundation of that. And the fact that, like, how is Target investing in Black creators who are building economic vitality and well-being for their own communities, and how do we elevate them? And so we were, from the assortment, working with our internal design teams, and how they really thought of building an assortment that would be thoughtful, really inclusive of the community, accessible in price point. Our in-store signage that we created was truly just, our creative copywriter is like a whiz, and she's like a poetic justice whiz in terms of how she creates words to, like, be poetry in our stores. And that's something we haven't really done before, but it was a journey that we tried to have guests go on to understand more about why does your well-being matter, especially and just having Black joy represented. And then how we showed up, we did a partnership with Versus, for those who follow the Versus platform, that's by Timbaland and Swiss Beats.